For some of us Canadians, the metric system is all we've ever known. Temperature in Celsius, gas in liters, cereal by the gram. But it wasn't always that way, and converting from imperial to metric was a long and bumpy process. So why did Canada make the switch?
Why? Why did this metric system come in?
I think it's going to be great.
Celsius, what is it?
It all started in 1970. The main benefit of the metric system is it follows a simple rule of decimal structure. That makes it easy to go from small units to big units without having complicated conversion factors in between.
I'm still old enough to remember pence and shilling and pounds, and one needed another conversion in between. And the same goes for miles and yards and feet and inches.
Europe had deep roots in the metric system, which started in France in the late 18th century. The UK, founders of the British imperial system in the early 19th century, made the switch to metric in 1965, just years before joining the European Union. Countries around the world followed. So in 1971, Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau's Liberal government formed the Metric Commission.
The government has stopped short of legislating a compulsory changeover. The reason? This gets Ottawa off the hook, paying the costs of conversion. A 1971 white paper just says the metric system is advisable and inevitable. As this board shows, every day, somewhere in Canada, one of 60-odd committees is discussing the problems of metrication. It could be the new sizes of tomato juice cans, sugar packaging, or screws and nails used in construction. By 1980, for all practical purposes, Canada will be a metric economy.
With that, they set out to inform Canadians, but not all of their marketing campaigns went over well, like this ad in the early 70s.
In sexist days of yore, a woman's figure was given a linear translation by a tape measure. Well, the Metric Commission thought that was a good idea, so they produced a poster with a young woman on it and a caption reading, "Girls measuring 90, 60, 90 are inevitable." The Women's Division of the Department of Labor didn't think that was such a good idea, and the poster was pulled. So now we'll have to learn our metrics another way.
There was one other massive issue: the United States, Canada's largest trading partner. Americans had thought about switching to metric too, but President Gerald Ford made it voluntary. And many didn't want to deal with the hassle and money, so the imperial system continued on. The head of Canada's Metric Commission expected that would make things harder for Canadians.
It's going to be a tremendous temptation always to think in the customary terms of inches and pounds and yards and so forth, and then to convert from the metric to the yards to understand it. That's inefficient, and you have to try to train yourself not to do it.
Think about all the mental math you'd have to do as things changed around you.
The big problem is that the old sizes come out to odd figures in the metric system. 25 pounds of dog food, for example, is 11.34 kilograms, and if we're going to get nice, neat calculations, the package sizes are going to have to be changed. The toothpaste people have taken the plunge in advance. Those tubes, you see, are all in even numbers of milliliters. The housewife, well, it seems she goes by giant economy size or whatever. She simply doesn't pay too much attention to measurements anyway.
Do you pay any attention to this labeling when you buy things at the store?
No, I don't.
Well, eventually I work in a hospital, and that's what we're doing now here in the metric system.
As the last shopper noted, the hospitals are well in the front. More than 60% have changed over already. The old apothecaries' measures are disappearing fast. These weights are already getting corroded. They're kept only as curiosities. 2 drams, this one says. And as for the smaller ones, the pharmacists have thrown their scruples to the wind and measure in milligrams. Upstairs in the nursery, the change is also complete. It may come as a shock to the new fathers and mothers, but their infants are being weighed in grams. This one at 3,830.
Now a look at the weather picture for our CBO morning listening area.
Canada's weather reporting officially switched over to the metric system on April Fool's Day in 1975. Yes, April Fools. Environment Canada awkwardly tested the new system as a severe storm hit the Maritimes. People woke up confused and frustrated.
Well, it doesn't make much sense, so.
At the time, David Phillips had just started at the Government Weather Service a few years earlier.
We were kind of almost the guinea pig. The one product that Canadians look at every day is the weather forecast. And so if we can get the weather forecast to be in metric, then Canadians will at least to kind of get used to it. By September of that year, we'll go with precipitation. We'll be in centimeters for snow, rain for millimeters. And then later on, it would be kilometers when speedometers changed over.
Phillips isn't too sure why the campaign was launched on April Fool's Day, but says it was probably tied to the government's bureaucratic calendar year, which starts each April.
I remember walking by that little group that was preparing it and doing it, and they had kind of like egg on their face. I mean, I don't think they really thought of it.
By 1977, all Canadian weather reporting used metric measurements. To help Canadians transition, forecasts featured helpful hints.
We said, you know, you get 5 millimeters of rain in the forecast today. Well, that's going to wet your car. Or, you know, 10 millimeters, well, you won't have to water your lawn today. And 50 millimeters, oh my gosh, you'll be going through ponds and splashing and soakers and roadways will be covered with water. Everything was blamed on metrication. If you didn't feel well, you said it was metrication. If you got a lousy storm or the weather turned bad, you know, it was not climate change, it was metrication that was at fault.
By 1977, all road signs had to use kilometers.
We feel that by September 6th, people in Saskatchewan will be prepared for metric. The Highway Traffic Board will be gazetting the speeds in metric, and I'm afraid that if he's speeding no matter what units you're using.
And there were the gas pumps. The government wanted Canadians to use liters by 1979.
Compared to $1 a gallon for gasoline, the price of Grasswood Esso in Saskatoon seems very appealing, only 21.3 cents. But that price is for liters, something that will become commonplace as service stations across Canada convert their pumps to the metric system. Consumers will have to get used to a new price for a different quantity of gas. That may be a nuisance for some people, but it shouldn't cause any real problems. And if you have difficulty figuring out just how many kilometers your vehicle is getting to the liter, your service station will probably have a conversion chart to help you.
People mad at metric took their...
But as the changes piled on, many Canadians weren't happy, and there was a big push to drop the conversion.
The campaign against Canada's move to metric tied up the House of Commons for half an hour this afternoon. The Conservatives presented a petition 5.6 kilometers long, or as they put it, 3.5 miles.
It was one of the largest petitions ever collected for presentation to Parliament, and it took 7 Tory MPs to carry it into the House of Commons this morning, so photographers could get pictures of the bundle of anti-metric signatures. And this afternoon, the actual presentation of the petition proved no easy matter.
This petition is 36 inches wide. It's 3.5 miles long. It weighs 247 pounds.
Consumer Affairs Minister Andre Ouellette, who is responsible for administering the metric conversion program, wasn't impressed.
The petition presented today is the result of false and misleading representation and information.
Ouellette says he will now write a letter to everyone who signed the petition in an effort to convince them of the merits of metric.
Fast forward a few years later, and it seemed like Canadians were even more confused by the conversion, at least according to this poll CBC reported on.
Metric conversion is very difficult for 39% of those surveyed. That's slightly higher than the 31% who expected it to be tough 10 years ago, before the metric system was introduced. Anti-metric crusader Jack Halpert says the poll just confirms that people don't want to convert.
They don't like the way it was forced on them, and therefore they've gotten their dander up and decided, I'm not going to use it, I'm not going to learn it, I want to stick to the old measure.
The Federal Metric Commission says it will all be easier when the changeover is complete.
We see metric all around us, but we still see Imperial, so we're really at the height of a transition phase.
Whatever the polls say, the federal government is resolved to continue the move to metric and expects to complete the conversion and dismantle the Metric Commission in a year and a half.
One of the big metric mishaps became known as the Gimli glider. In 1983, an Air Canada flight from Montreal to Edmonton made an emergency landing at a Manitoba airfield after running out of fuel. Remarkably, the plane made a safe emergency landing at an airstrip near Gimli, Manitoba, about 90 kilometers north of Winnipeg.
Air Canada says the people who refueled the 767 in Montreal made a mistake when converting the weight and volume of the fuel into metric. The airline says from now on, 767s will not be allowed to take off if the fuel gauge isn't working. All fuel measurement procedures are being reviewed, and all training programs for the 767 will be re-examined and strengthened.
Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney's government eventually ended the Metric Commission and made the switchover voluntary. South of the border, America had started testing road signs in kilometers under President Jimmy Carter, who supported efforts to go metric. That was until the early 80s, when President Ronald Reagan torpedoed the Metric Act and Metric Board to save money. But there are some American industries who use it, like NASA.
In fact, that led to some catastrophic issues with the Mars Climate Orbiter in 1999. When they tried to send it to Mars, the manufacturer had reported measures in Imperial units, pounds per square inch, and they were expecting newtons, which is a metric equivalent, and it didn't work. The Mars Climate Orbiter burned up when it reached Mars, and visited $100 million and more in development.
The metric system is now used by virtually every country in the world, and it's the scientific standard, especially in meteorology circles.
You know, it has been from day one. So there was no problem from a scientific bent organization, but it was the public acceptance of it that was the challenge.
Even after the switch, Imperial units have crept back. Height is often measured in feet and inches, and weight in pounds. You can thank our neighbors to the south, who remain the one true outlier. But don't try asking a Canadian kid nowadays what the temperature is in Fahrenheit.
I remember when my daughter said to me once when I was explaining something in temperature, and she said, well, could you, what would that be in Celsius? And I thought, oh my gosh, it's working. The new generation has got it, and I felt so proud as a parent.